Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Orr. I am the managing partner at Orr Group. We are delighted to present this webinar, what's turning out to be every week, because we enjoy the subject matter and we appreciate the feedback and the input that we get from you. So please bring it on. We're ready to tackle any topic that you feel is important at this mysterious time. And the most enjoyable thing for me always in doing this is being joined by my colleagues who I think are terrific expressions of what we do and how we think. So that's what we're going to try to impart to you today. What you had asked for and we've responded with today is to dig into planning. So there are three types of plannings that we thought we'd focus on: strategic planning, which is broader, of course, more for the organization; development planning and assessment specifically around fundraising; and then campaign planning and feasibility, because so many organizations right now are thinking about or in the middle of campaigns, and there are a lot of questions about what should be done in an environment like this. So we'll be discussing the various parameters of these planning tools, and importantly, whether this is the time to consider employing them for your nonprofit right now. So just to frame where I think we are still, most of us, I think, are in urban or around urban areas, and therefore we're still on lockdown. There may be some that are on the call that are not in urban areas, and maybe things are opening up. We hope so, and we hope it'll happen in New York and DC in particular soon, but we're still on lockdown. And I think we can look towards the summer as a continuing period of being conservative around the virus. And for our businesses then, for the nonprofits that we're involved with, it probably means that there are going to be substantial changes in the way we think about the management of nonprofits, the way we present ourselves, the way we interact and discuss important issues with donors. So a lot of issues to think about, and a lot of those fall into strategic categories. So it's very possible that we will have to go through a period, and that's already started, where we'll have to take a complete fresh look at the organization's strategy, perhaps the operational methodologies that we're using, and particularly the fundraising plans. And that could be a top to bottom analysis, and it might be something on the margin. But those are things that we want to raise today and think about. So if we could have a graphic, I want to characterize the way we're looking at the world and the progression of thought process that is happening. So what we've seen in the beginning of this COVID experience is in the darker blue area, the second darker blue area, which is really the fear zone. And it's oh my gosh, the world is falling and we don't know what to do about it, and this is unprecedented and all of that. I think we're through that period and well into the second period, which is the learning zone, which is exactly what I think the way we've been trying to characterize the way we are thinking in the last 2 or 3 of these webinars. It is that, okay, the shock and awe has passed. We understand a lot more about what we're up against now, and now we're applying it to our own situation, and we're making plans for the next steps. And I actually think we're moving into the growth zone now, which is, okay, what are we actually going to do? What's our plan? Because we need to get to it. The world is starting to turn back either to some form of new normal or needing in our business to raise funds to sustain either our presence or our growth. So we can do away with the graphic, but we thought that was a nice way to sort of think about where we are right now. So again, want to talk about strategies today. I've got 3 of my outstanding colleagues with me today. You've met 2 of them before. Kelly Dunphy has been with us the longest, 13 years. Kelly heads up our strategy now, so it's most appropriate that she is front and center here. Craig Shelley, who has become a rock star on these things, he's been with us for 7 years. He's one of our most senior relationship officers and a managing director. He advises many nonprofit charitable organizations on all these matters that we're going to talk about today. And then new to the panel, Regina Cialone is a senior director. She has 20 years experience in the business. And impressively, Regina, I saw that you had a master's in nonprofit management. I did not know that. Delighted to see it. Now we know you're an expert, so that's good. So house cleaning, as always, please use the question and answer feature if you want to position a question. We almost always get to all of them or variations of them. And then we wanted to make a special consideration today If you feel that any of the things we're talking about today might specifically be applicable to your nonprofit and you have questions about that, we're going to offer up Kelly Dunphy as a point person that you can contact and say, I'd like to have, a call with somebody on your team just to talk about how this might be applicable to us. So I'll talk more about that at the end, but I just wanted to highlight that in the beginning while you're all still paying attention, that we want to make that offer. So let's get to it. I want to start with strategic planning. Kelly, I'll go to you. Kelly, you and I, have done a lot of strategic planning for nonprofit clients. And, my gut tells me at least that we're in a period where if we're not, proceeding with some formal process, we likely are taking advantage of an informal process where we're taking a fresh look at our mission, our vision, and maybe even the whole programmatic impact that we're having. I mean, I'm in discussions every day with numerous nonprofit organizations that are saying, I've got to relate to the current environment. How do I do that? And how long-term is that going to be? Is it a short adjustment, or is it something I really need to be thinking about as a seminal change for this organization? So, those are all things that we've got to take a look at. One of the most positive things, Kelly, I know you and I have found is that interaction that takes place between board, staff, and really the people who are the most embedded, the most opinionated, frankly, and that it can probably help us the most moving forward. And strategic planning is always helpful in that arena. So let me just position it by asking you, how do we as a firm or group look at strategic planning? And then specifically, we'll talk about whether you think this is the time to engage in a process like this or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you for everyone for joining. So when we think about strategic planning, it's about choices, right? So how do we fulfill the vision and implement our mission? How do we do that? What choices are we going to make in what our programs look like, how they operate, et cetera? And how you answered that question 6 months ago may need to differ either slightly or possibly greatly during the period we're in now and potentially for the next several months or longer. And a planning process or exercise can help you do that. So for example, we work with an organization that has a workforce development program, and they're really wrestling, that involves some job placement as well. And they're really wrestling with how do they achieve their mission? It's not only training their students, but also helping them be placed in jobs in industries that have been hard hit by this. So they're really thinking about and having conversations about how do we adjust how we're trying to achieve our mission so that we don't lose that impact while we're wrestling with coronavirus. And there's so many other examples from healthcare organizations to parks and so on. How do we continue to fulfill our mission with the world having changed? So a planning process can really help you do that. And why now? I just want to say a couple of things about that. We've been managing through a really critical period for the last couple of months where many of us have had to make some hard choices for how to even just keep our doors open. Yet at the same time, I think times of crisis can help drive great innovation, but it can be really hard to step aside and do that in this kind of intense environment and take time for strategy and thinking how to innovate. So I think it's really necessary that planning can provide a way to navigate a path forward beyond just the next couple of months. And it can help you stay focused on the original problem your organization was founded to solve and how you might need to pivot your approach. And also really create an environment where you can ask the hard questions about, what's going to work now? Where's the risk in how we might make some changes? What do we need to do differently?
So Kelly, to put a finer point to that, everybody on this call is struggling with, I've got to figure out, I've got to save the organization perhaps, or I've got to accelerate it because the need is so great and we're providing, a huge amount of servicing. We are so busy, doing what we do right now, that is it really something that I can afford or should spend the time in the planning space? Just real quickly on that. You answered a lot of that, but is it worth it in your view?
Yeah, a short answer, yes. I think when a lot of us think about strategic planning, we have something in mind that takes, 3 to 6 months, sometimes even longer. And it, is a very sort of deliberate process. And I think there will be a time for that. maybe further down this year. We'll get back to that. But right now, I think probably a lighter touch is more appropriate and more doable, more feasible right now. And because for a couple of reasons. One, for the one that you pointed out, Steve, it's really hard to take the time and resources to do that right now. But also, as things continue to evolve and there remains uncertainty, longer term planning just probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, because there's this need to remain nimble and being able to pivot as things evolve. So, a lighter touch might look like a half-day retreat with your board and senior staff leaders to ask these hard questions. How are we going to continue to fill our mission? How do we need to adjust our programming? How do we need to make some changes operationally? What is our fundraising and other resource generation how does that need to evolve to be able to support any changes we're going to make? So taking that time, even just a half day, to put those hard questions on the table can really create some buy-in and alignment on what your goals look like, even for the next 6 months. And then you might need to do that again, come back together in 6 months and do the same all over again.
That's a great way to think about it. And Craig, I want to ask you for a couple of examples in a sec. I thought it would be smart also, though, to say what we're doing as a firm. As we all know, everyone knows in this call from OR Group, in the beginning of the year, I put in place a number of initiatives. We call them committees and task force, and really to take on important pieces that enable us to grow. How do we assemble and manage data? How do we perfect our dashboards? There's just a zillion things that we're looking at as an organization. So, the normal course of business is kind of hard to get focused completely on those when we're all handling clients and such. Well, this period of COVID, the last 6 weeks, has enabled us to go full blast on that. The whole firm is involved. We must have, 8 committees, 7 or 8 committees and task force. Yes, Regina, that's a lot, I know. But everyone's involved and we are making serious progress. So I want to use that as an example for yourselves. Staff, you want to keep your staff engaged. You want to keep your board involved and thinking, intensely about your mission and about where you're going next, and you want their help. So these type of, sort of short-term endeavors that you described, Kelly, are really important and can really help shape the organization, through this immediate crisis. So Craig, as we think in either the short form or in the long form, I know you've done a lot of this. What say you with examples?
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks everybody for tuning in again. I've been thinking a lot. I think the example of what's happened here in our group is very sort of pertinent to this. Crisis has a way of sort of crystallizing your thinking, right, and sort of narrowing your view and allowing you to focus on things. So just the way our process probably would have plodded along at some slower pace, but then once our backs were to the wall, it was much easier to be like, okay, this is now important because these are now sort of life and death issues. So I've been thinking a lot, so when I've been a CEO for a nonprofit, one of the main things we did was we had a camp, and shortly after I arrived, there was a death at the camp, which obviously was horrific and tragic and a crisis. But now that was sort of the above the water crisis that everybody saw. That was the second fatality there in about 3 or 4 years. The property was bleeding money, right? We were losing money hand over fist. There was huge debate amongst the board of, do we need this property? Couldn't we just use somebody else's camp? So, but the crisis allowed us to sort of crystallize a vision for what we wanted to do with this. And then we're able to sit with a number of key board members. This was sort of it wasn't a real sort of intense process, but it wasn't the short form process, which we could talk about in a second too, but let's sit with all the key stakeholders and decide over each sort of horizon, what do we really care about here? How important is it? And what are we willing to do to sort of fix this? Because the crisis allowed us all to recognize this was not sustainable forever. So you see this in organizations we're working with now. In many cases, by no fault of their own, they've gotten to these points where their program delivery approach is it's expensive. They know it's expensive. They know it's too expensive. They know it's too labor intensive, but they sort of they got there in baby steps. And now how do you turn back without sort of losing sight on your mission? This has really forced organizations, this crisis, to say, if I had to deliver everything dramatically different, because you do, how would you do it, right? So now we're able to sit with boards and say, okay, we knew that this was a challenge. Now we have to solve it. So you get a lot more buy-in from a crisis. So whether you sit for a half day, whether you sit for 4 months, whether you do it on the back of a napkin, or whatever process you take, the buy-in I think is much quicker right now than it's ever been before, which is one of the reasons this is a good time to sort of wrestle with whatever your organizational challenges are. I mean, you think about it. I saw Governor Cuomo. They're actually asking consultants to come and if we had to reimagine learning, in New York State, how would we do it? Well, that's a question that everybody's been wrestling with for 20 years. Who knows if this is the crisis that allows it to get done, but maybe it is, right? Now, again, back against the wall, suddenly you're willing to do things you weren't before. So it's a great time to look at.
Right. So crisis forces change. Change is a fearful and difficult thing to embrace, but time and time again, you find that if you do embrace it, it forces you, as Craig is saying, to deal with situations that really have been around for quite a while, and you just haven't had either the opportunity or you have not been forced to dealing with those issues. So that's where we are right now. So our strong advice is grapple with these things. It takes strength and it takes horsepower and it takes a lot of grit. But that's why the people on this call are in leadership positions at one level or another. So that's really great advice. Regina, let's bring you in. You co-authored, I guess last week, a blog piece where you specifically talked about situational approaches to planning, that organizations could undertake right now in this environment. Can you just talk about that a bit?
Sure. I think the article echoed a lot of what Kelly just shared with the group, and that is that when we think of traditional strategic planning, we tend to think of a long process, taking place over months or sometimes years. And in the context of COVID, we want to look at it from more of a situational lens. So that means that it can specifically just answer questions such as what now, and how can we move forward? So that may look like, as Kelly mentioned, an assessment of your COVID-19 response and your post-pandemic roadmap. It could look like, a review and course adjustment of what current strategic plan is already in place. But the article and what I was trying to convey is that sometimes the biggest value of a strategic planning process is in the process itself. Because as part of that, it's giving you the opportunity to increase your collaboration and, most importantly, increase your communication with some of the people that are most important to your organization's success, your board, your leadership, your key stakeholders. And it gives you an opportunity to not only build on your existing relationships, but to create new ones. And I think ultimately what we're saying is, now is the time to take that step, not back, not to pause, but sideways. To plan strategically, to make sure that we are optimizing this moment, we're taking advantage of it, to bring innovation and creativity that we may not otherwise be looking at into our organization's plans.
Well, that is very topical advice. Where can they find that blog? Can they go to the Org Group website?
Yes, you can find it on the Org Group website.
That's a advertisement for our website, Regina. We are putting a lot of content out around all these issues, so please go to our website and take advantage of it. Okay, let's pivot now into development assessments. The thing I love about strategic planning that a lot of firms are involved with is they often leave the organization with a robust, new, and very expensive plan. And the development pieces really haven't been worked out or thought about. And if it's going to cost several $1 million to execute that new strategy, gee, I wonder where the money's going to come from. So we call this next step the development assessments or development plans. And Regina, if you would not mind, just take us through the way that we typically think about going about a development plan. What does it entail?
Sure. One of the things that I love about Org Group and some of the work that we do is that for our development plan or any of our planning, we're really looking at not providing anything that's cookie cutter. And our approach is always to be honest, practical, action-oriented, but to be as specific to the organization as possible. So when we're doing a development plan assessment, we begin by reviewing current material. So we do a lot of information gathering, like your case for support, your donor communications, your strategic plans. We review your systems and procedures, such as your database, your donor pool, what already exists as far as a prospect pipeline, how that's looked, the success of it. And then we conduct interviews, again, part of that informational gathering with key staff, leadership, and then key stakeholders like your board members and or prospects and or individual major guests, major donors. And so the important part of those conversations is that not only are we getting really good information that can help inform our plan, but we're also using it as an opportunity to engage your potential donors and your potential supporters in a way that may not otherwise have happened outside of this planning process. So we take everything we've learned. In addition to a environmental scan, we'll look at comparable organizations and see what we can take from there as far as opportunities that maybe your organization hasn't considered. And we put together a practical strategy, so an action plan and an approach. Recommendations on your case, your communications, your donors, your leadership, your processes, your systems. And those action steps are taking a look at what you need to reach the goal, your specific nonprofit goal. So that may not be just overall revenue generation, though that may be the case, but it may specifically say, we're looking to engage a major gift program that we haven't had before. We're looking to really engage our board in a way that we're not sure. But our recommendations are going to take into consideration very specifically the best way to increase your revenue with the goal that you have in mind. And most importantly, it's not just the recommendations, but it's going to give you that roadmap how to get there.
So Regina, we're getting some good questions, so I'll come back to that in just a moment. But Regina, we've done a lot of these development plans together, and at this moment in time, is it the right time to do a development assessment, or is it, again, I don't have the time, I need to get out and fundraise and so forth? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I know everyone's first reaction is, well, I'm a fundraiser, or the board's reaction is, well, you know what you need to do? You need to go out there and raise money. But it's not that simple. And I think, the formal professional assessment, this is the time for it. It's absolutely an essential moment to sort of reimagine your organization's approach to what is going to be a very different donor market. And that formal assessment is going to help guide and inform the process, so that your organization can work smarter, not harder. People are motivated by different things now. And as part of that assessment, you may discover that your case needs to change, or there are new donor types that you need to pursue. For example, you might need to begin work immediately at diversifying your revenue streams. I can think of one client that we worked with that had an incredibly strong direct mail program and hadn't worked on building up foundation relationships. But at this specific time, now that they're looking at foundations that are addressing their work in light of the COVID crisis, they're really taking advantage of building up that new relationship and that new path of revenue.
Okay, great. There's one great question for all those who consider themselves consultants. How can I get a consultant engaged in the work we're doing without it becoming, overly involved with the crisis itself? Craig, what do you say to that? Let's reposition.
No, I would say I don't think you can, right? I think right now, with people that if you're working with organizations in a role sort of as a consultant as we are, and I think I'm understanding the question of what should they be doing to sort of get it.
How can they actually help and not
right? What can they do to actually help? And I think it's get as deeply in as you possibly can, right? I mean, it's very evident to the organizations I work with that I'm there with you, whatever. We need to sit with your board chair on Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and go over the financials for the 20th time. Sign me up. Let's sit there. I think it's truly partnering. I mean, we've always done that as a firm. Now I feel like we're sort of self-promoting ourselves, but what the heck? We believe in that firmly, always. But now more than ever, you have to be a partner. If you're a consultant, they don't need you right now. What they need are partners that are going to roll up their sleeves, sort of put your shoulder to it and get things done.
Yeah, just this morning, there was a group, I won't mention the name, but a name that everyone would recognize. And I just said, look, I know some of your board members, and I know enough about your mission. I'm a member of your organization. How can I help? I see the revenue issue. Let's just talk. Maybe I could sit with you for an hour and we come up with some ideas. Because we're all talking with, numerous leaders of the nonprofit organizations all the time. And we're hearing what everyone's doing. So that's how you might be able to use a consultant where you're not ready to pay, the freight of a specific assignment, just giving advice along the way. Here's one, probably Kelly, back to you. To what degree is the board and the executive team including input from the staff, how involved is that to get everybody's buy-in in that process?
Yeah, I think it is an important step in, especially right now when you are needing to perhaps test some new approaches to how you're doing program delivery, where there might be some risk involved there. You don't really truly know if it's going to work. And so you've hired, say, for example, these programmatic experts into your staff. I would give them, a little bit of leeway and freedom to, see how those, changes work out and pivot in the moment. So I think because of that, because they're going to be the ones actually sort of delivering your program, I think it's important to get their view of, they're the ones that are boots on the ground. I think it's an important perspective to incorporate in your planning.
Okay. So Craig, I'm going to go to you, and this goes to the issue of pivot that we wanted to talk about. But one of the questions is, what's your advice for nonprofits and boards that are fundraising to keep their doors open, but will likely not survive the crisis? And I see that being parallel to what we are all talking about every day, which is how do I pivot from, say, an event that's coming up where we know and we're going to announce, or we have announced, that there's not going to be an event, but we want to keep fundraising anyway. We want to secure the funds that have already been committed, and we want to keep fundraising even though all the benefits that we've been talking about, including a dinner or whatever, are not going to happen. So what is your view? I mean, how have you seen good examples of organizations that have successfully pivoted, not just with events, but from one type of fundraising to another?
Yeah, definitely. I think everybody's trying to do it right now. It's one of those, like, if you had a really diverse revenue stream, in some ways that's maybe work to your disadvantage, but if you had a really diverse philanthropy stream, like, now is a great time for you. But to the person's question around, like, what would you do if you know in your heart of hearts that you're not going to survive the crisis? I mean, that's an interesting question. So to me, I would start focusing on, like, what are ways in which you can contribute to the overall, like, continuance towards achieving your mission? Is it taking your best assets and sort of selling them to another nonprofit? Is it, closing down everything but the one thing you can afford to still do because it matters? So I think that's sort of a broader issue. But particularly on events, I was thinking about this earlier today. If this suspension of sort of events and being able to gather a large people, kind of bleeds off into the fall, and I'm not predicting that it would, but if it did, which is probably not totally unreasonable, I think events maybe are, like, kind of gone forever, at least in the way that we know them. I think if we pull out of this and by, like, August, September, October, we're doing events again, we're fine. We're going to kind of fall back into our old habits. But I do think there's a piece of you that needs to start to prepare, like, what if I can't go back to this as sort of a main fundraising thing? And there's lots of things you could do. In some ways, we're seeing organizations, like, it's easier to solicit the people without the event. I'm getting almost the same amount of money. I'm not putting in as much effort. So I think if you have a good core of supporters, you're going to be okay. You can sort of transfer that in a different way. But what I was trying to think today, like, what will I really lose if I wasn't able to do these events anymore? And it's really an acquisition of major donors, right? Because there is, other than events, I have not found a good way to get people, like, to give first-time gifts of, like, $10,000, right? But, like, they'll buy tables at an event, and now all of a sudden, they've entered your organization at this higher level. But people do that because, like, there's this paradigm of, I will open my network to you. I'll be honored, whatever it is, sort of to many, right? And invite them to sort of this thing. So it's sort of a one-to-many paradigm. What we're going to need to get people, though, too, is like a one-to-one paradigm, that's why we do events, because people don't want to do that. I don't want to ask Kelly for a favor, but I'll ask Kelly, Regina, and Steve for a favor all at the same time. And then, like, if one of them says yes, that's fine. It's less confrontational. But, we're seeing things like virtual town halls. We're seeing things like, sort of virtual coffees. We're seeing a lot of sort of thought leadership webinars like this, where you can sort of bring content specific to your nonprofit. Those are all great at sort of getting the people that are already bought in. I don't have the answer yet of, like, how do you get those new people to come to something that's virtual? And I think that's what we'll really have to figure out, and what we'll really lose if we can't gather in mass gatherings for some long period of time still.
So I want to give you a little bit of a counterpoint on the event theme that, that it's going to, or the prediction that it's going to go away altogether.
And I'm not saying it will. I'm just saying.
Right, I know. You're not saying that literally, but like 30 years ago, we started the firm. We were a gala firm because my wife, produced galas and I was a fundraiser. So we went that route and it was huge and it was evolving and it was great. It was a great way to raise money. But after a while, after 10 or 15 years of doing that, we decided, this is crazy. We're spending so much money. The nonprofits are spending so much money and they're sometimes getting to the major gift goal, which is the way you described it, and sometimes not. Well, in the last several years now, it has become important, but it has also become something that every organization wants to think about stepping back from, right? I mean, it's just too much. It's too much work. It's too much money and all that stuff. So this is the moment where we look at it and we say, gosh, if we can do the same kind of thing virtually, and just as you were describing, maybe that should be the trend. The problem is, I think that events are so effective in that you get people together and you showcase and corporations, people and such will give by buying a table. It's a transaction. It's not this huge sell, over like foundation and putting a proposal together and all that. It's a sort of immediate one and done kind of thing, which you don't want it to be. You want it to be a long lasting operation, and it produces, importantly, unrestricted funds. So, I'm not arguing with you, but I'm just saying, we'll see. Let's hope, because there's too much time and effort being put into all that stuff. So I agree with the
But I think those are all the reasons why I probably won't. And again, but as an organization, start to figure out how you might do those things without an event. But
your advice is
I don't know.
right on. So Kelly, let me go back to you by asking, you and I have worked on a number of strategic plans where the development assessment was not ever considered. And it led to a huge new visionary plan that was very costly. And the organization at the end of the planning process was left with a beautiful plan, but no way to fund it. And you and I have done some work on how to repair that or approach it in a more comprehensive manner. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think what you're describing is that, fundraising or creating the resources to pay for that plan is often an afterthought. It might not be as exciting. It might be even more challenging in coming up with the strategic plan itself. So, maybe that's understandable why it is so. But what we really recommend when we talk to organizations about that, might need a strategic plan, is to be thinking about development planning very soon after that, or even starting that as part of the strategic plan, because you're going to go through some real discovery process as part of your strategic plan that will tell you a lot about, if it's done the right way, your fundraising program as well. And so there's a lot of good learnings there that you can then begin to apply to a development planning process that's tied to the strategic plan. So if you set out your goals and priorities for the next 2-3 years, and what it's going to take operationally, how it's going to increase costs, what kind of additional staffing you might need to hire, so what that budget's going to look like. It's almost like budget planning, right? How are we going to bring in the revenue to execute this plan? So I think that has to be part of the strategic planning process, is how are we going to pay for this? So perhaps say your strategic planning process takes like 3 months, you might start the development planning in month 3. Now for planning right now in the sort of lighter touch, it's quick format we've been talking about earlier here. I think, new things that you might be trying with your program delivery might open up new avenues to funding, different kinds of funders than you've approached before, because you might be doing something different that now falls in their wheelhouse. So again, I think any changes you're thinking about making right now, still ask the question, how will we pay for it? What kind of resources are out there? What kinds of donors that we could approach to support this?
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move to campaign planning. It's our third category of planning. And Craig, I'll go to you first. As you know, you're involved and I'm involved and we all are involved in so many, answering questions about, there are so many campaigns underway. Most organizations were or are in the middle of a capital campaign of some type. It might be a short term, it might be a very long, comprehensive type of campaign. So the biggest question with COVID at the moment is, should I continue this? Should I alter it in some meaningful way? Should I change the case statement because of what people want to give to? What has been your general advice on this?
Yeah, and I think, if you think of campaigns in terms of all it is really sort of deploying your sales force of staff and volunteers aggressively to raise money for a big idea that's sort of organized in some fashion for a finite period of time, right? So like if you think of like it's really boiled down, that's what campaigns are. Like there's not a scenario in which I think you would raise more money by not doing that, right? Like if you said no, let's not be aggressive, let's not have a timeline, let's not sort of focus on an idea, like you'd raise less money. So like I think the short answer is if you're in a campaign, you should continue with the campaign. From a planning perspective though, like I think one of the big takeaways for me on this whole topic is no matter what you're doing, the world around us has changed. So probably what you're doing, or at least the way you're going about it, has to change, right? So your ambitions probably don't change, but maybe the timeline of your campaign changes. Maybe the case for your campaign gets tightened in a different way. Maybe some of your prospects change, right? Like your big prospect was, I don't know, they owned a chain of hotels, right? Like that might not be your big prospect right now, right? So I think there is a very deliberate sort of step sideways, as Regina described earlier, to think about your plan and reevaluate where it's going. But I think there's very few, maybe no cases where I would say the answer you would arrive at is we should stop what we're doing. Again, unless what you're doing is no longer important, but then you probably stop doing it, right? So yeah, but if you're gonna continue, I would continue your campaign.
And just to share my own experience, just about every organization that we are currently engaged with on a campaign is continuing it. Now they might be slowing it down momentarily, but it's as important or more important today as it was 6 or 8 weeks ago. So there's that. But clearly there are changes that have happened, so we've got to be attuned to that. What would you say about new campaigns? Is that the same? Actually, before you go there, let me go to Kelly for a minute, because Kelly, we've been involved with a big campaign. And then just recently we did a midterm reassess, or sort of an update on where are we and what does that mean for the upcoming months and years. And that had nothing to do at the time with COVID, but it would be a good example maybe to talk about in context of COVID. So what was the experience there?
Yeah, so this is something we've started doing, this kind of mid-campaign review or mid-assignment review, because plans change, right? They're only as good in some ways as like the day that you finish them. And so when you're talking about a campaign in particular, which could be 3, 5, 7 years, you want to undertake a process probably every year of the campaign to see, okay, where are we against the original plan? What's gone really well? Where are we lagging? Where do we need to course correct? Say we've done really well and we're exactly where we need to be. All right, what's coming next? Do we still have the right staffing in place? Have we increased our donor pool enough that we need to think about adding to our major gift team? Those are the kinds of questions that I think this kind of midpoint assessment, and you can call it planning, but really taking stock of where we are, how we got here. Is it working? Do we need to change anything so that we can finish this out successfully?
And a lot of times in a mid-course, you might be going from the non-public portion of the campaign, and then the public's going to mean a lot of different new tactics and different types of fundraising. So there's all of that. Yeah, I think the work you and we have done in this category is really important. So Craig, let me go back to you on new campaigns then. It's surprising how many conversations we are having at the moment about, well, we were about to launch a campaign. I think we'll use this time to go ahead and launch a campaign, but what are you hearing, and what would you recommend?
Yeah, it's one of those, it's sort of like that, like if you want to sit under the shade of a tree, you should have planted it yesterday, but the next best time is to plant it today, right? So like, I think if you have big ambitions and you need to realize them by raising more money, like why wait till tomorrow? You might as well start today. Now, I think specifically on campaign planning, the question that I most get is, with the economy the way that it is and the uncertainty that's out there, a big piece of campaign planning, which I think is important, is sort of going out, interviewing donors. It's a cultivation. You also sort of get that data point of, oh, if you were to give, if you considered a gift, where would it be? So people are concerned that in those conversations, people are going to undershoot their number right now because of the way the economy is. That doesn't worry me, because here's like a little secret. Most people undershoot their number anyway, right? Like they haven't been cultivated towards this campaign at all. very few people, except for the most sophisticated, no matter how many times you explain it, understand you're talking about a multi-year commitment. So they'll almost always try and bring their answer back to like what they would give in 1 year. Nobody thinks about like a blended gift and sort of plan giving and how that puts into it. All of which is to say, like, everyone you interview undershoots that number, which is why those numbers from those interviews are one piece of helping you determine your goal and what's feasible and where you're going to go. It's also past history. It's the affinity of people. There's so many things that go into it. So that concern doesn't concern me. So I think you can move forward without too much worry about that, though it might be harder to do. So then the other sort of objections you would have to planning now would be, well, people are very distracted. Yes, but I've never had such ease with getting people to meet with me, right? Like people are willing to talk. I mean, I could spend a lot less time talking to people like this if I had my way, but like people generally agree and they will get on Zoom and talk to you. So I think it's a great time from all of the planning piece. And then if you're like sort of through that and you're about to launch, well, the first thing you're going to do is talk to the people that are closest to you, right? Your campaign leaders are not strangers to you. These are the people you're going to recruit to make your first gifts, be your first movers. They're already connected to you. And certainly what we've seen is people that are connected to an organization are remaining connected through this, are getting more generous to the things that they care about. So I think definitely, like, if you're going to start campaign planning, or you're in the middle of a campaign plan, or you're about to start sort of making your moves to move forward, the timing is in some ways better than it's ever been, because people will give you the time and have thought about what's important to them. And I think the urgency is more than it's ever been, right? Like if you need it now more than you needed it 3 months ago. So yeah,
and if you go with the context that you develop, which is really a campaign is just a continuation of major gift work, you know, and you go from one, but campaigns are structured in such a way where it's a very compelling reason to give larger gifts, all of that.
Yep.
But it would fit right into that. Regina, I want to go, Craig raised the issue of setting goals and, you know, in a feasibility, for example, the testing part of it, you know, what's the magic around creating a goal and how realistic is it and how important is it?
I mean, you can't get to where you need to go without some kind of roadmap, right? There's only so far that winging it will get you there, right? What's the snarky statement? Hope is not a strategy. I hope we get to our goal, right? So having that goal keeps your eye on the prize, gives you something to constantly be aiming for. And you may have to adjust course to get there, but that's incredibly important. In the lens of major gifts, though, I feel like, you know, previously we as a nonprofit industry tend to get very tied up, especially in those goals, especially what are my key performance indicators? How many calls did I make? Those are all really important things. But right now, and in this next normal, I think we have an opportunity to create an exact real change. So not necessarily pivot, but change the way that we're looking at building relationships with our major donors for it to be, you know, much more donor centric. And so, you know, take advantage of this opportunity and this time to approach things in that donor centric way, to be innovative, to work with your donors as partners and collaborators and not just the answer to your financial crisis. And so having those goals, I think, gives us something to aim for, and how we get there is really telling, and now's the opportunity to be creative about that.
So one of the questions here is, how are you advising nonprofits to wisely use their email and their social media presence? Today's environment is obviously different, this person has noted, you know, so let's see, do you suggest nonprofits get current prospective donors to read their organization's email and respond? I'm not sure about that part of it, but from a communication perspective, particularly, you know, the way we tend to communicate these days, do we see radical changes happening? Kelly, maybe you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, I think what I've been seeing across organizations I work with and just other organizations that I follow is that there is an increased attention being paid to how we use our social media platforms and how we're using our digital communications vehicles to get the word out and let people know how we're doing in response to coronavirus, you know, how the people we serve and the communities we serve are doing. And, you know, people have a lot of time on their hands, right? They're sitting and looking at their phones even more so. You get those alerts on your phone if you have an iPhone, like your screen time was up or down. You know, I think it's up for a lot of people. So I think a lot of people are paying attention to social media, maybe more so than they were before. So I think it makes a lot of sense to devote more time and attention and resources there.
Okay. I had a question here. So what's your advice for nonprofits and boards that are fundraising to keep their doors? Oh, we already did that one. Sorry. Okay.
Steve, I just wanted to add to something that Kelly said about in response to the social media and the virtual communications. So I think that donors right now, by necessity, are just becoming more familiar with digital communications, virtual communications. But I would urge that nonprofits don't feel like they've got to be in it to win it. Be thoughtful about your approach to your digital communications. And it should be integrated as an approach with your other communications. So, sending out the email, that's the exact same thing you sent out via mail. That might be the exact same thing you're putting on your social media is not strategic, right? They need to sort of feed into one another and be a conversation with your donor. And so I would always suggest that when you're writing specifically to your donors via email campaigns, social media campaigns, sit and literally have a donor in mind as you put that language forward, because that'll help you, I think, connect with them much closer than just putting something on social media because some other nonprofit had it out there and you feel like you also need to be present with some kind of response.
I think to that point, Regina, too, a thing that happens a lot that I think people lose sight of on this sort of digital communication. They'll be like, well, I did an email blast and we put it all over social. It's like, well, your email list is 112 people and 4 people follow you on social media. So why did you think that was going to generate any money? So a lot of times people worry about the messaging and the medium, but maybe not how to build a list, right? I mean, you have to build that sort of constituency before digital fundraising goes anywhere for you. Is it an answer? Yes, but it is not an answer for everybody. And if you're sitting on 12 email addresses, it's not an answer for you yet. You have to build that out first.
Another thing I would add on communication, it's not so much digital. Everything you're saying is great. Webinaring like we're doing right now and Zoom calls, with many people on it is a tactic that works, all day long. I was just on the phone with the hospital this morning and I said, boy, you've been in the middle of the COVID response. You're on the ground. There's so much appreciation for what you all have done as professionals. And why aren't you out, webinaring on that topic? And they said, well, we are in certain respects, but with donors specifically, as a message by which to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we have dealt with this issue. Maybe we made our mistakes, but here's all the great things that we've done. That's terrific advice, I think, for every nonprofit organization. You don't have to be a hospital. You don't have to be providing medical service in that way, but you can be discussing with your community what value your organization brings. It might be kids with education. Everybody can relate to that. I think communication, positioning yourself in a way of speaking honestly about what you do to your community is really vital these days. And pretty straightforward, but it's not being done probably as aggressively as it should. And it's related to campaign. If you're in a campaign, you should be doing that. If you're in a major gift program, you should be doing that. If you're fundraising in any way, you should be doing that, I would think. So what else do we want to talk about today? Regina, did you complete your thoughts about the donor perspective? Because you had some really interesting points there.
Yes, I did. But to add for a moment about what you were suggesting for organizations that are on the front line, I have worked with a client that is on the front line, and the majority of the revenue, the majority of the fundraising has come from events previously. And so one of the things that I think made a difference in our response here is that we didn't not do anything. And so that's my one recommendation. If your one takeaway when you leave here today is don't not do anything. Like there needs to be some kind of action. And so rather than, well, no, we can't be asking for gifts. Well, no, we shouldn't be talking about events. Well, no, we shouldn't, it doesn't feel right. Could we, we immediately launched into picking up the phone and calling our donors, which previously had been somewhat transactional because it was event based. And so maybe, that felt a little odd, but it didn't, because we were warm and we were just checking in and we were sharing the good work that we were doing on the front lines, and the appreciation was rolling through. I think that those conversations are going to really inform later on our approach for when we are no longer fundraising by events, our new plan, and being able to have some kind of conversation with these donors to talk about a major gift to support our frontline work or various other programs.
Yep, that's good. So there's a question here about give and get policies, and that is always an interesting topic. So the question would be, is this a time to be re-examining that, rethinking the strategy there? So Kelly, I'll ask you, actually, Craig, I'll ask you to do that one. And then a second part of that question is about legacies, which leads us to planned giving. And Kelly, I'll ask you to reflect on that. So Craig, do you want to talk about give and get for a minute, what your views are there?
Yeah, I have a pretty stringent view that you should have give and get requirements, and that you should put specific numbers to them, and that it should be give and get. Like maybe there doesn't need to be a specific number on the give, but you should have to give something, and then you should be like sort of bought into getting a certain amount. And I say that with like complete black and white, there is no gray, but then I throw in a bunch of gray and say, you probably only need about 75% of your board to sort of be at that level, because you need some people on your board that can't do that and are there for other reasons. Despite being a fundraiser, I recognize boards have other responsibilities beyond fundraising. So it's sort of like set this very stringent requirement and then be okay with the fact that some people aren't going to make it. People talked about, is there an innovative way to, the question also is like, how do you get people sort of more activated on that? I mean, it's very difficult if they didn't come onto the board with that as the requirement. Like it's very hard to sort of push it in, particularly like right now, to just say, okay, we have to do it. But we had some success with the board over the last few weeks of, we got very specific around like, these are the 5 things we need every board member to think about doing. We know you're not going to be able to do all 5, but you do 2, you do 3, you do 4, you do 5, you do 1, and we'll all get where we need. And then we took a group of 4 or 5 board members that were really committed, and they've been calling each of the board members and basically running through the 5 things and saying, which one of these 5 things can you do? How can you be helpful to us? And I think they were a week into the calls. There was one gift, the guy went from a $5,000 gift to a $25,000 gift. Somebody advanced their pledge payment from next year to this year. All sorts of good things are happening, but it's the one, being clear about what you want, and 2, putting some peer-to-peer sort of pressure in there, of having board members call each other. Those are the things that I would do if I was trying to activate my board better.
And Craig, I could add to that. I've been the outsourced executive director for 5 organizations now. And one of them was for a long time, for 20 years, and there were 40 board members in that group. And we had a very strict give and get policy, as you're advocating for. And what I've found is an excellent tactic, and people ought to be thinking about this, is in January, I would sit down with every single board member one-on-one, and I'd come in with kind of a report card, and I'd say, here's what we did together last year, and here's what we didn't do together last year. How do we want to work together this year? And your goal is, your give and get is whatever, 25,000, 100,000. How are we going to get there? Let's figure out how we're going to do that. Who could we involve? Do we need events to do that? Do we need just to go out and make asks? What are the tactics we're going to use? I found that to be incredibly effective because it was tangible. We had a plan. We could come back to it middle part of the year and say, how are we doing against that plan? We could come back the next year and say, gosh, we didn't fulfill that at all. What are we going to do this year? Or maybe it's time for you to step off the board. It sets up really a great accountability kind of discussion with those board members. So I'd strongly advocate pursuing it in that way. So Kelly, let's go to the issue of planned giving. That's always an interesting topic. And I think, Kelly, you would agree with me that in the post-2008-9 period, planned giving, in the last decade has just become, it's always been important, but on a proactive basis, it's become much more important in positioning it, just given the fact that people are a little less able and willing to release cash, but they're much more willing to look at their ultimate wealth and say, oh, I'll put you in my will. But how do you feel this particular crisis is going to impact planned giving, and how much focus should there be on that?
Yeah. So to your point, totally agree that's happening. And then the other thing I would add is a crisis like coronavirus. It has people thinking about their own mortality, right? And that then leads them to think about, are they ready financially and with their estate plans? God forbid, something like that were to happen. And so you have this combination of people thinking about their wills and estates, and then at the same time, how can they still support the organizations they care a lot about, but maybe aren't as comfortable giving as much cash right now. I hate to say it, but a great opportunity for, planned giving conversations. And just, where this question started was around, I think, board giving and getting, this is, your board is a great place. If you have not really tackled planned giving in any kind of intentional major way, a great place to start is with your board members and begin to have those conversations with them. And I guarantee you'll have some real wins out of those that then you can use to share with others, and invite them to join their peers and leaders they might admire. And then that'll open more conversations for planned giving. So it's a good time to be thinking about planned giving for sure.
Agreed. And there is $68 trillion moving one generation to the next 25 years, if my number's still accurate. That may have changed given the current environment. Right. A few trillion here or there, but a lot of money has been created and are sitting in families, and there's decisions being made, as you said, about, with estate attorneys about, well, gosh, how am I going to protect my family from having to pay these enormous taxes? Charity is a wonderful alternative to paying, more taxes. So it just makes a lot of sense to a lot of people to be thinking aggressively about that. And we, as representing the charitable sector, should really be thinking about that and providing, expertise to the extent we can. As a firm, we've really focused on that. Kelly is also heading up that effort with me on that. And it's a fascinating area and something that I would encourage everyone to spend a lot of time on, because it's going to continue to be a really important piece. So we're pretty much running out of time. I wanted anyone else to provide any remarks, the panelists, anything else finally say?
I just want to say there's one question that's been here about, like, do you survey constituents and staff before strategic planning? And, short answer, yes, but that's a big piece of the whole process, is to get feedback so people feel heard, so they are heard, and, they're sort of on your team at the end. So I just know that question's been hanging out there. But yeah, it's been great.
Regina, any final words of wisdom? You don't have to.
You're asking me if I have any final words. This is not the first time you've talked with me. I'll have words until tomorrow.
That may have been a mistake in retrospect.
Yeah, no.
Brief words.
That's an impossible mission for me, so I defer to Kelly if she has anything else.
Well, here, instead of forcing you all to say something in conclusion, we have talked about strategic planning, development planning, and campaign planning. Those are all planning exercises that are very different. Different tactics sometimes are the same, but the goals and what we're trying to achieve are often very different in those three bodies of work. So again, I want to make the offer that if you would like to follow up with one of our team members and have a one-on-one conversation brief about your specific situation that is occurring in your organizations and whether the timing is right and how you might go about that, we'd be happy to entertain that. And Kelly, we're going to make you our point person on that. And as soon as we hang up here, all of our emails will be up there, but please contact Kelly by email and she can direct it to the right person on our staff. So with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for participation. Great questions. And we will see you likely next week. Thank you so much.